We met in Banff. Are you familiar with Banff? Have you ever heard about Banff? The Rocky Mountains. It's in Alberta. Who has been to Canada of you? There are some. Who has been to Alberta? 1, 2. Interesting.
Missing out.
Yeah. Alberta is the Texas of Canada.
Well, that's what people in Ontario would say.
So,
but that's not what people in Alberta would say.
what would they say about Alberta? Because you come from Alberta.
Yes. But even that is, when you say that, I think somebody might say I come from Treaty 8 territory. Somebody might say I come from Sawridge, and make that kind of indication rather than.
No, but I would like you to make this indication. I think talking about your verb, it has a lot to do with the place you are coming from, or the point of departure where you are coming from. Could you let us know a little bit about where you slave day?
I would say that you're right. It is about where I'm coming from, and I think that what I like is where I'm coming from is sometimes less a location and more a series of stories. Am I being evasive?
No, not yet.
When I think of Slave Lake, there was another town before Slave Lake, remember. It was called Old Town, and it was called Sawridge, and then it burnt down, or it got flooded, and then they built a new town, Slave Lake, and that's where I grew up. And it is north by Canadian standards. Edmonton is the largest northernmost city in Canada. I think it's equal with Siberia. And then Slave Lake is 250 kilometers north of that. And that's, it's a very small town, and Edmonton was the city you go to get groceries and back to school clothes and things like that.
250 kilometers to get groceries.
Well, not your everyday, there's like a grocery store there, but you know, it was funny, I was just showing someone this photo of, in the Northwest Territories, way up north, they were selling vegetables in hummus platter, like this, $70. Because it's a food desert, and it's hard to get things there, so they become quite expensive.
It remains.
Yeah, that was last week.
Oh, well, okay, so I thought it was 30 years ago. No, but that goes, the effects, which I'm working for a Canadian organization already for 11 years, on a completely different, geographically on the other side of Canada. But it's a rural area as well, or it's a kind of an isolated area if you look from there to Ontario, also it means Ontario to Toronto, or Newfoundland. This is also where we met, we go there later. But the territory, the area where you grew up, was it always dependent on transfer money? Is it dependent on the state? My question is more as looking back for the story of your mother, how your mother was trained, because you talk about it, how your mother went, where your mother went to school. I think we need to talk about this here in a German context, in a Middle European context. People don't know about this.
Yeah.
So
there was a legal mandate across Canada that was if you were a legal Indian, if you were a native person in Canada, your children were removed from you and taken to a residential school. And my mother and all of her siblings were taken from my kokum, her mother, and raised in a residential school. They separated the boys from the girls immediately. They were not allowed to speak Cree.
Cree, Sylvain.
They're the only language they spoke. They had to speak English. And there was, aside from the systemic racism and abuse, there was also other systemic racisms and abuses, physical abuse, sexual abuse. In fact, we're learning that in Eastern residential schools, that they were even being tested on medically, given food to test them. My mother has I don't know why I'm telling you this, anyway, my mother has a terrible story that when she said that she was taken into the school and the nuns took them, stripped them of their clothing, and put them in this room. And then water started coming down. And my mom thought...
This was when? 90...
Probably in the 70s, 60s. And my mom thought, I'm being poisoned, I'm going to die. But it turned out that, Native people, they were just assumed that they were dirty children, so they took their clothes and got rid of them, showered them, and gave them new clothing. But my mom couldn't understand what they were saying, and they didn't explain it. And she was in this system, in residential school, until she graduated at 18 years old.
But by then, until when did the residential schools exist?
They say in the 80s.
Mm-hmm. So I think this is, this is definitely not the image what most of Europeans have about Canada. Yeah, so this dark side of Canada, that the times changed dramatically. So, but how is the situation today? So, you have not been to a residential school, so that was completely
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
over. But what has this historical background of not really family background, this historical background to do with your life today, if at all?
Well, of course. People know, we know that that's a trauma. We know that if someone has to live through a kind of trauma like that they often can't narrativize it. They've had to survive it. So it is the generation after that begins to try to piece together and create a narrative around this thing that wordlessly affects their history. My mom doesn't talk about it often. My mom doesn't say very much about it at all. But I don't speak Cree. First of all, I don't speak Cree because my mom doesn't speak Cree. This is a very plain and simple way to understand that the events of residential school affected the next generations. When I'm here in Germany and I'm hearing people who can speak English and German, and I hear them speak a little bit of English, and then I hear them slide into German, and I see them, relax. I see that there's an exchange of a culture. I see that there's something very beautiful happening because they're speaking their own language. And I don't have that in the way that the Cree culture might have been alive in the language, is alive in the language. So that is one really sort of concrete way to understand the effects.
In the indigenous, there are various tribes, indigenous cultures in Canada. Huh?
Tropes?
Tropes, yeah, sorry.
No.
Many, well, I don't know how many, but a few, plenty.
Right.
So, and what in the Canada of 2020, what does has the history to do with the contemporary society?
It's hard to say. It's like it exists. It just exists. It always has ever since that, you know, or I don't know when it started. But you can't escape that kind of thing. My family today, you can see, I don't know my uncles. I'm not close with them, and I'm not close with their siblings the way I am with my aunt's children, because they were separated. And that separation stayed. And they weren't allowed to speak Cree, so that stayed too. And I'm sure there's a myriad of other smaller, subtle things that have happened that I've inherited that I do because you've always done that. Is that what you mean, like on a more personal way, or?
Yes and not. So recently a friend of mine, a US friend of mine, said, look at artists are now in journalists. Journalists are doing marketing, and the creative industries are, the creative people are working in tech industries and in the digital life. And do you see your work as, is it journalism what you do?
No.
Why is it art? It's definitely not art for art's sake.
No.
For what does it stand? You are a storyteller.
I'm not intelligent enough to speak deeply about journalism and what the state of journalism is now. But I have no responsibility and no facade of objectivity. I'm not trying to catch all the sides of something. I'm not even trying to be complete about something.
But what do we see there?
A punctum.
Take one.
A punctum, like Roland Barthes' punctum. It's this the thing that pierces, the thing that resonates. I try to catch that thing, and.
But there are plenty of metaphorical aspects in your work.
Yes.
So the tent is a very dominant, ever appearing image in your why tents?
Well, tents showed up after there was a fire in my hometown. This is after the flood. The fire burned 60% of the town. The entire town was evacuated. And it burned down my mother's house, the house I lived in. And my whole family had to leave, and they were living in a hotel for a month or a couple of months, I don't remember. But during this time, people lived in their summer cabins or camper trailers or whatever. And it was this temporary kind of life. And it was a provisional shelters they were in. And a camping tent is a kind of perfect metaphor for that. And it's a perfect metaphor for a larger displacement and all kinds of displacements and all kinds of ways that people have had to create shelter out of something that still leaves them vulnerable. And also, yeah, I think that would be the metaphor. So I don't wish it to be a metaphor for something specific like indigeneity or an indigenous thing, because what is really being thought about and talked about is something that everyone can understand, even if they've never been in Canada or they've never known about the history of Indigenous people in Canada. You can still understand that, you can still connect to it. And that's a little like empathy.
Do you expect empathy from the people who are looking at your work? Are you sure you don't want that people understand the story, what is behind your background? it's your biography, otherwise you would not talk about your biography, and also you mention it in your CV.
You asked.
And I asked, but it's also in your CV, and but you also could tell, okay, this my biography has nothing to do with my work. There are plenty of artists, not nowadays, but we talked yesterday, we talked about the exhibition at the Haus der Kunst. Do you see there similarities with not with the painting, with the painter itself, but with the stories he's telling? Because he's definitely talking about his biography as well, or where he's coming from. I don't want to use the word, but we should talk about identity politics.
Okay, well, here's my question for you, if I may, is there, when or if an artist were to say, my biography has nothing to do with this work, do you trust them?
It depends from which generation the artist is coming from. Yes.
That their biography might have.
The younger ones, yeah. So if you talk to artists who are in their 70s and older, or artists who are younger than, let's say, 25. So lots of my, former students of mine, they are different. Yes. I think it's a generational phenomenon, which I like a lot. So when I make example, people know that I'm quite close to Vivian. He's definitely not in his writing, yes, but in his physical work, he doesn't talk about his biography. You can't see it. He's not 70. But I think, and I trust him, yes. I don't think it's a question of trust. I think it's a global, really a global phenomenon that we see so many artists who are. It's tricky. Maybe at also the show in which you are in here at the NS Documentation Center. So many of the exhibiting artists they're talking about their biographies. Yes.
This is really complicated because part of me wants to say that if an artist were to, certainly it may not be evident, it may not be available to the viewer in a really clear way, but an artist to say my biography has nothing to do with my art, I'm like, I have to be careful, but I mean, how beautiful would that neutrality be? If, it would be really fucking luxurious, but we don't all have it, and I don't trust.
Do you think you can, after that would mean there are two ways of understanding or looking at your work?
I would hope more.
Tell me more. Yeah.
Well, I hope that you bring.
But knowing you, not knowing
you were just joking.
Knowing you and not knowing you, it makes I can't look at your work neutral anymore. That's.
Do you look at Liam Gillett's neutral?
No, also not, because I know his biography. Yeah, no, and I know him. So it's also with most of the other artists, but I never look at. I don't want to look behind. When I look at some art piece from an artist I don't know, I'm usually not interested in where this person is coming from.
Right.
So that's if I want to learn more about a specific artist, I'm also joining artist talks like this one to learn more about how is this person reacting to awkward questions. Yes. So, or it's about this. So it's about when we met for the first time, I think 30 years ago, or 12 years ago. When was it
At the
exactly?
Bath Center?
Yeah, or when was it?
Shit, that was 2009.
11 years ago. It's a while ago.
2009, I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, that was brief.
It was brief, but it was very, to me, because you were so impressive, and with these huge paintings.
This is a lie.
Yeah.
You're lying right now.
Okay. But I remember it. Yeah.
No, you're lying. You walked in and walked out. You had your blazer and your Ray-Bans. You like flew in.
No.
Thanks, but no thanks. And you hit the bricks.
No, I remember it, but So, but years later, I was. At that time, I worked together with a friend of yours, Brian Young.
Yes.
I organized an exhibition with Brian Young, and who also had a show here years later in the Villa Stuck, by the way. How do you relate to other artists in Canada with an indigenous background? Brian Young is one example.
And Dwayne Linkley.
Yeah, and Linklater or Walter Scott.
Walter Scott.
Mm.
Brian and Dwayne are closer to me. I'm just closer friends with them.
They're closer to your generation.
Closer to my generation. Oh, Dwayne and I have known each other for years and years, and I knew him since I was in my undergrad. So we connect, and I like the way that they speak about things with complexity and allow that complexity to sit there instead of trying to, I don't know, try to make it a better story or something. How can I say that?
After knowing Canada for so many years, to my experience, most of the Canadian artists I find interesting, they are intellectually extremely well trained, extremely smart. They know a lot about history, about art history, about North America, in the US is quite open as well, but especially in Canada, also looking at the art schools and art universities, their education is completely different. So, and if you compare it to European arts education, what you, as the first place you go when you go to a university, were you trained from the very beginning about the plan that you are becoming an artist?
Was I trained from the beginning to this plan that I would become an artist?
Yes.
Undergrad, no. I think it's like I didn't know I was going to be an artist. I didn't even know after grad school. After grad school, for years, it took me years to get over grad school because
you are in your mid-20s, no? So.
Usually.
Yeah, usually.
I was a little older, but because what happened is two things. I came out of there immediately, sort of, my ideas are so important because they're my ideas, and I was just so busy navel gazing. And then I have spent a lot of time after grad school pretending to have knowledge that I didn't have because I thought I was supposed to. So you sort of become a little bit of an intellectual imposter, or I did. And and actually I feel like that just got renewed when I came here, my first time in Europe, and then this time too. I just am always feeling like I'm making up for a deficit. So I don't know how to answer.
No, I don't agree. This is probably has something to do with you have been into French, German-speaking context, never to the UK. Something to do because you don't understand everything what is happening around you. There's another language spoken, which is maybe not so good, you can hide. Huh? So that this is for me impossible when I'm going to Canada or to a native English-speaking country or French-speaking country. This I think it's good. Huh? But still, for me, I look at your work. That's very personal to say, but also very important. I look at your work here in the European context, completely different. I see it here much more political than in Canada. When we organized a show in the Full Gallery, I looked at it different. My question is, does the context, the physical context of your work, if it is in another cultural system, display, becomes it different?
Yeah, it absolutely must. That's the importance of residencies, that's the importance of putting up, for me, having an exhibition and putting up your artwork is a chance to see it differently. See the kinds of conversations that are happening between the work. When I was in my studio, there was a through line, there was an idea that I had, and I was going to make these works that were sort of around a narrative, which is different than a story, because a story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And a narrative is, sometimes about what's missing. So I had this narrative through line, and that's what I was working on. But that's in the studio, and it's so different. So then when you get into a room like this and you put up the work, it does something else. And if this room were in Alberta or Fogo Island or Munich, it would be different. I think.
I agree, but I would like to catch up on what you said. What is missing? What is missing here? Are those works completed? Do we see a process?
These works are as complete as they will be. I would like to say something that's clever, and I would say it's the liminal space between secret and mystery. But does that mean anything?
I told you are a journalist.
But
You pretend, when you said what you just said. But when you, again, what do we miss? Or what do you miss?
Why would you say I'm a journalist?
No, that was...
I'm not a journalist.
No, that what you just said, it was also a lie.
So that's journalism?
Can be. Pretending.
Pretending. I think... Okay, what are you asking me?
What do you miss? What do you love?
What is missing here?
Maybe more general. What do you know? I've written now a book which I've done, and you are in it as well. What do we know? What do you know? What do you love? What do you miss? And where do we go to?
I know painting.
What do you love?
Painting. Brenda paint.
What do you miss?
I love humans, though, I would say. I know painting and I love humans.
Where do you want to go? Looking into...
Hold on, I'm trying to answer them in order here. So what do I know? Painting. What do I love? Humans. What do I miss? Anybody who isn't here, anybody who's not in front of me, wherever I go, I'm like a baby. So I go like this, I think everybody's gone. So when I'm here, I miss Edmonton, I miss my friends, I miss my family, and then when I'm in Canada, I miss Germany, and I miss everybody here. I miss Katrin, I miss, my heart. So I think we're always missing something.
Where do you want to go with your work? What comes next?
Fuck, if I know. If the pandemic has taught us anything, we don't fucking know. We don't know where we're going. And all of these answers are probably lies too, because they'll change.
I wasn't thinking about talking about the pandemic.
No, but like I'm just saying, like, these answers, you've asked me these questions and I'll give you the answers, but ask me again and I'll give you different answers. It's always going to be different.
It's good.
And maybe I'm lying.
Do
you think people can trust artists?
I've never asked myself if art is about trust. Yeah, so I'm very happy that art is not about trust. It's something what can lead us into another. It's definitely not fake news. So, but it's diving into another. For me, art is learning about something what I don't know. It sounds a bit cheesy, but it's definitely the case why I love art and I want to look at art, not only visual art, all art. You know, learning things about what we don't know. Yeah? And we are already surrounded by so many things which we know. You know? So we know.
Right.
Yeah, that's boring. Yeah? So it's flattening the world more and more. Yeah?
But maybe that's also the answer to where you want to go, because you want to go where you want to keep learning. You want to keep learning. That's what I want to do when I'm painting, when I'm making art, when I'm having an exhibition. I want to keep learning. But the problem is,
you produced this show, these three paintings, the ones you have seen the exhibition at the NS Documentation Center. There are three paintings of Brenda, and they were made before the pandemic. Those all of, is it true? All of those were during the pandemic.
Yeah.
Did it change your way of producing and thinking?
No.
No.
It was funny because when it first happened, and I had come back to Canada in mid-January or something, and then we were in isolation and weed is legal in Canada. So I was high for the better part of 2 weeks. And finally, my friend was like, "You have to go to the studio now because you're making everybody crazy." So I did.
He said, no news.
What?
Oh, God.
What did you say?
No news.
No news. It was
No.
nothing. You're just sitting there. You're just.
Oh, making everybody crazy. So it's no news to me. So.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that one later.
Okay.
I went to the studio and I started painting, and it was easy. That first painting was fucking easy, and it was emotional because it clarified for me that in this time of all the shit happening and we're living in this uncertainty and all this whatever, I know one thing. I know painting. I know this thing. I have this thing. I have it. I have it for myself as a thing that will always be there for me, the one thing, and I have it to offer. That's what it clarified for me. And so in that way it was fortifying, and I just kept coming back to the studio.
Thank you, Brenda. Be sad for 40 minutes. Thank you. Any urgent questions? Otherwise, we talk behind the scenes. We have free from any masks if you go out. No, thank you. It's a year to
This is the
Thank
second
you.
mask I've lost.
Yeah.
In one day. Thank you.